Look at verses 3 and 4. For now they say, we have no king, because we did not fear the Lord. And as for a king, what would he do for us? They have spoken words, swearing falsely and making a covenant. Thus judgment springs up like hemlock in the furrows of the field. Israel at that time was saying, we don't have a king. Now, Israel did have a king. They had a king the entire time. But they said, we have no king. Now, why were they saying that? Because, listen, their kings were incompetent. Their kings were incompetent leaders who were incapable of leading the nation or enforcing the laws of the land. And so it was as if the nation didn't have a king in the eyes of the people. Verse 4 indicates that the leaders that they did have were liars who made false promises to the people and covenants that they didn't keep. And I want you to note this here. I want you to note this. In the final years of the nation, Israel had a crisis of leadership. In the final years of the nation, Israel had a crisis of leadership. And listen to me, incompetent leaders and incompetent leadership was a part of God's judgment against that nation. Isaiah chapter 3, verse 4, if you're taking notes, God says, I will give children to be their leaders and babies to be their rulers. And one way God may bring judgment on a nation is to curse that nation with incompetent and ungodly leaders who are incapable of leading the nation. Like handing the nation over to children to run the nation. And I want you to know, too, that the crisis of leadership that came in the nation of Israel in the last days of that nation, the crisis of leadership in the nation came at a time of great economic prosperity in the nation. At a time of great economic prosperity. You know, the economy was going well. Stock market was booming. And God gave them incompetent leaders. And in addition to that, according to Isaiah 3 again, the incompetency of the leadership led to the oppression of the people. The people became oppressed under the incompetent leaders. And a breakdown in the order of society. And this was all part of God's judgment. You know, when we hear or think of God's judgment, we think of, fire coming out of heaven or something like that. Sometimes God just gives a nation incompetent leaders to judge them. And then look at the end of verse 4. The end of verse 4 says, judgment springs up like hemlock in the furrows of the field. God's judgment was springing up all over the nation, like weeds. It wasn't one thing that was happening in the nation. It was a dozen things that was happening in the nation, that were happening in the nation all at once, all over the place. And this was God's judgment. This was God's judgment on the nation because the nation had turned its back on God. So verse 5, the inhabitants of Samaria fear because of the calf of Beth Aven, for its people mourn for it, and its priests shriek for it, because its glory has departed from it. If you remember, we've talked about this in recent weeks. King Jeroboam set up a golden calf in the north in Dan, and another golden calf at Bethel. And that's what it's referring to here, the golden calf at Bethel. Bethel means the house of the Lord, but here Bethel is called Beth Aven, which means the house of wickedness. It was the house of the Lord before, now it's the house of wickedness because they've got this golden calf there. And this golden calf now is carried away. Its glory departs. Verse 6 says, the idol also shall be carried to Assyria as a present for King Jareb. Ephraim shall receive shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of his own counsel. So their golden calf is carried away by the Assyrians as kind of a trophy for their king. Listen, you should never trust in a God that somebody else can steal and take away from you, right? I mean, that's crazy. But that's what happened. As for Samaria, her king is cut off like a twig on the water. The king of Assyria will be cut off by the Assyrians. He'll be carried away to Assyria like a twig floats away on the water. You've done that before with your kids or whatever. You drop a little twig in the creek and watch it float away out of sight. And that's what's going to happen to their king. He's just going to go away off to Assyria. Their leaders are gone. Also, the high places of Aven, the sins of Israel shall be destroyed. They practice their idolatry on high places, on hills. The thorns and thistles shall grow on their altars to their idols. They shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. And this is talking about the judgment that's going to come at the hands of the Assyrian army when the Assyrians enter the land and invade the land. The people of the land will cry out for the mountains to fall on them, wanting to die, rather than face the brutality of the Assyrian army. Now, in Revelation chapter 6, we're told that during the tribulation period that will come upon the entire earth, that 7-year period when God pours out his wrath upon the earth, that the people on the earth will say to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. The people will know at that time that God is pouring out his judgment on the earth, that it's the wrath of the Lamb, and people will want to die rather than experience God's wrath. Now, for those of us, I always like reminding those believers of this. For those of us that are believers in Jesus Christ, we've trusted Jesus Christ, we will be taken to heaven before the tribulation begins, either through death or rapture. God is going to take us from heaven, take us to heaven. God has not appointed us to wrath, it says in 1 Thessalonians, and praise the Lord for that. We'll be with Jesus in our Father's house in heaven. We're not going to be on the earth when God is pouring out his wrath on the earth during that time. But people would rather die than try to live through it. It's going to be so severe.